If you have a moment where you've asked yourself, did I make that up? Is that really intuition or was that my imagination? If you've had that moment, this is a great session for you. Today, I'm going to talk about intuition versus imagination, and better yet, I'm going to give you a tool to help you to differentiate. So if you're brand new, welcome. If you've been using your intuition for a while, let's help ramp that up a bit for you. Make sure to click subscribe and the notification button. I want you to get all the videos, spend some time with me, and really hone in on that intuition of yours. Now, before we get started, I know that this session is in audio and it's also in video, but for those of you that are watching this session in video, I want to do a little Yahoo to my new studio. I am recording in a completely new studio, brand new. I'm very excited about it. It is super comfortable. As some of you know, I was traversing across the United States, full-time RVing, visiting all different states, all different locations. It was magnificent energetically. It was educational and wonderful, but I've landed. And part of landing is that I get a brand new studio. So if you're watching this in video format and you see that going on in the background, you're like, well, that's different. Welcome to my new studio. Okay, let's jump on in here. Imagination versus intuition is a very popular discussion in the circles. In the Sage community, in the Sage circle, lots of people have that question quite frequently. And I've been teaching people how to open up their intuition. I'm thinking through this for a second. Since 2008, I think was the first round of the Sage method. And it's top of the list when it comes to curiosity. How do I know when this is my intuition and when this is just me making it up? Now, let's cover a couple of basics so we get an understanding of where this is coming from, where it's going, how it's flowing, etc., etc. And then I want to give you a technique that I want you to try. Try it for about a week and see what happens, because it's a very subtle difference between imagination and intuition. Very subtle. Teeny tiny. If it wasn't, you and I, we wouldn't be having this discussion right now. So this subtle difference is that it can bring about such frustration, right? Super small difference between imagination and intuition, huge frustration wanting to know what's actually coming through. Let me talk about why that is. And then, like I said, I'm going to get into a tool that you can play around with, have a little bit of fun with. When it comes to intuition, I talk about the right side of the brain and the left side of the brain. Quick review for those of you that have been following me for a while. Reviews are never a bad thing. Quick review when it comes to how the brain functions in connection to intuition. The right side of the brain delivers the information. It is the creative flow. It is the process that allows that channel to really, be able to express itself. The left brain, however, is very analytical, and it is going to want to analyze, pick apart what comes through your intuition. Now, while I'm explaining it this way, does it actually flow only through the right side of your head? No. This is a way to describe the purposefulness behind the flow of intuition and the purposefulness of that which blocks intuition. One of my absolute favorite analogies, I have a couple, and all of them seem to be quirky fun, but this one is one of them. One of my favorite analogies is the mail carrier delivering the mail. So if your right brain is the mail carrier delivering the messages, delivering the intuitive messages, then the left brain is the dog trying to bite the mail carrier. That is what happens with intuition. We have an intuitive moment, something comes through, and what do? Naturally, we start to say, I wonder what that meant, or that could mean this, or maybe what it's saying is this, or maybe it applies to this person or this thing. What happens very naturally for a lot of us, and this is a technique that we eventually really kind of grow out of when we're opening up our intuitive channel and using it in our day-to-day life. What happens is the information comes through the right brain, through the mail carrier, delivers the message. That's our intuition. And then our left brain, the dog, bites the mail carrier by going, well, I wonder what this means. Maybe it can mean that. starts to analytically pick it apart. Now I'm bringing up this sort of review or basics about how intuition flows because I really want to emphasize why it is so difficult to distinguish between imagination and intuition. It is difficult because your imagination also uses the right brain. It uses the same station that incredibly cool mail carrier is hanging out in. It flows through the same types of patterns, types of channels. This is why it is difficult to distinguish what's intuition and what is imagination. But while they're flowing through the same channels, they flow through the right channel and through the right brain, and then the left brain wants to pick it apart. It happens with both of them. But while they're both flowing through that same sort of feel, and it's really hard to know what is what, there is a way that we can start to distinguish. And what I want to say is, and what I really want to let you know is the more you use your intuition, the easier it will become to distinguish between the two. If you talk to someone who's been using their intuition for a long time, when something comes through, they will just know. They'll be like, yep, oh yeah, that was definitely intuition. Or, yep, I definitely made that up. They'll know that feeling because they've focused on the difference between the two for some time. And in essence, that's really what I'm getting around to here in this session, is just talking about focusing on the difference. When we focus on the difference, we can start to see the difference. It's when we just sort of say, I don't know which one it was, and then stop there, we never really get into that state of distinguishing between the two. So here we go. What I want you to do is I want you to reword your words. I want you to use different verbiage around intuition and around imagination. And I want you to do this for a week to 2 weeks. Now, you do have to actively have moments where you can be intuitive. You do have to actively have moments where you're sitting down and defocusing and relaxing into your intuition, or perhaps pulling a few cards to do a reading for yourself. You do have to actively approach intuition in this practice that I'm about to give you, because you do need to invite yourself into the feeling of both. What we're going to do is, when I say we're going to change our wording, change our verbiage, we're going to, instead of for the next week or two, you determine how long you'd like to do this, but please do it for at least a week. Instead of using the word intuition, I want you to use the word pull. And instead of using the word imagination, I want you to use the word push. Let's break both of those down very specifically so we know what we're thinking when we're speaking about these. But for the next week or two, what I want you to do is, every time you are curious about if it's your intuition or if it's your imagination, I want you to be curious about if you were pulled or if you pushed. So instead of, just having these two beautiful words, I want you to break them down to an action statement. And that action statement is going to deliver the message internally to yourself to pay attention to how the moment felt. This is what it is to distinguish between the two, to stop and to learn that feeling. I recall years ago, this was probably right around 2009, 2010, if I recall, my guides came through and gave me meditations, literal meditations. Here's the wording for it: create guided audios specifically to help people feel the difference between intuition and imagination. Now, that set of guided audios is literally called Discovery Meditation. I've been using Discovery Meditation with students for years now, and it is really helpful because, in essence, that guided meditation, what it does is it walks you into your imagination first, and then it invites you to let go into your intuition. And it does this through a series of different audios, different approaches in each one. And by walking through Discovery Meditation and these guided audios, you start to feel the subtle difference between being pulled or push. So that whole series of discovery meditation is really powerful. If you really groove with guided meditation, this might be a tool that's very, very helpful for you. I'll make sure to put a link in here. But on your own, day to day, when you have a moment that you think might be intuition, but you're not quite sure, what I want you to do is I want you to stop and review the moment. Stop and go back, almost try to replay the moment in your mind or in your body, in your system, and ask yourself, did you feel like you were being pulled, or did you feel like you were pushing? This is the verbiage we have to get really specific on. What I don't want us to do is say, oh, was I being pushed or was I being pulled? Because both of those are you involuntarily having something happen. When it comes to imagination, you're the one pushing. When it comes to intuition, you're the one being pulled. So when we're starting to use these terms, what I want you to do is you have a moment, you think it might be intuition, you're not quite sure. I want you to stop, give yourself the space to replay that moment, and then feel in that, was I being pulled? Was I being surprised? Was I being brought into something? Was I discovering something I didn't expect? Was I being pulled? Or when you replay that moment, were you actively pushing the scene into creation? Give yourself that moment. This only takes a minute. And over the next week or two, I'm going to ask you to play around with intuition, read some cards, meditate, do a defocus exercise. I've got the defocus exercise when it comes to developing guide communication in the top 5 tools. That's a perfect one. Do that one every day for 5 days. And then when something does happen, because it certainly will, when something does happen, when you're doing that defocus exercise, and I'll put the link in here for that exercise as well, that's attached to the free course. When something happens in there, what I want you to do is stop and go, okay, something happened. All right, was it intuition or was it imagination? Here we go. Was I being pulled? Was I pushing? And I want you to revisit that situation. So this technique, you're going to do it for a week. You're going to do it for 2 weeks, perhaps, if you want to. This technique changes the verbiage of intuition and imagination into pull or push. Were you being pulled? Or were you actively pushing? It invites you to step back in and review what just happened for yourself. That in itself is going to elicit a bunch of intuitive growth. That process of reviewing what just happened is a process that is it's an observational process, and it's very valuable. With this technique, you're going to start to recognize the very subtle feeling of being pulled or pushing. Use those words, use that verbiage for a couple weeks. Make sure to play around with your intuition. Make sure to, try reading some cards, do that exercise for guide communication in the top 5 tools. Do something like that every single day so you're in some sort of a meditative or intuitive state, so you can then have a moment, so you can stop, pull back, review the moment, and ask yourself, am I being pulled or am I pushing? In time, with this new practice, you're gonna start to differentiate. You're gonna start to feel that subtle difference. And when you do, come back and let me know. I've witnessed so many people get over this particular hurdle, and you can too. Here's another one that's subtle but super perfect. Click this video to watch next. It's gonna talk about my favorite question to ask your spirit guides.